fight fans? Welcome back to Puncher's Chance. We have a great episode 3. We didn't get a lot of fight stuff last week, but we got plenty of news to talk about, and we also got plenty of stuff to break down for next week. Definitely make sure to follow us on all social media accounts. You can follow us at Punch ETB. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench podcast network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. Follow our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ETB Network for our shows and all of our other ETB Network shows. If you can't watch our podcast, well, then certainly put your AirPods in and take us on the road and listen to us wherever you could go.
Puncher's Chance is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching the commentators and communities you care about, win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule.
So, usually we like to start these podcasts breaking down fights or recapping fights. But this week, it's a little unique week. Wasn't really exciting week last week. And the biggest news in, the entire mixed martial arts and combat sports world is Ryan Garcia being expelled by the WBC. Unfortunately, for making some bad and awful mistakes and using some racial slurs on social media. Man, Brett, Ryan Garcia just continues to, be a dumpster fire and, go downhill. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I obviously don't condone what he said. The things that he put out on social media were absolutely horrendous. And, there has to be, repercussions for those actions. I thought that he should have been taken off X or at least suspended by the platform a while ago. And now I guess that X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, they don't monitor people the way that they used to. In the last presidential election, they monitored the president of the United States, but now we have a boxer on here who, is throwing racial slurs and things. So it seems like the app is really loosened up and is being more lenient. But I thought that they should have deplatformed him a while ago. As far as the him being banned by the WBC for a year, I think that that's probably a good move. Their commissioner or president came out and said that, he doesn't condone Ryan's actions and, he thinks that there has to be consequences like what I said. And I think that it's probably a good move, especially PR wise for the WBC. And we'll see where Ryan goes from here. But in the sport of boxing, these are not choir boys that we're sitting and talking about. Gervonta Tank Davis just got out of prison for domestic violence. We've seen people in the past like Bernard Hopkins and Ron Lyle get out of prison for, lengthy sentences and then get into the boxing world. These guys are very tough competitors and great athletes, but to go and sit and think that they're the greatest human beings in the world, you'd be sadly mistaken probably most of the time. Now, there are great cases of guys out there. We see Daniel Cormier and, Evander Holyfield and very charismatic people, but at the same time, there are bad apples, and Ryan Garcia seems to be going downhill.
Yeah, it's been a trend. He definitely should have been taken off the platform. I know ever since Elon Musk took over X, he wants to give freedom of speech. He wanted to be the exact opposite of what Twitter used to be. That's why he bought it. That's why you see guys like Andrew Tate and other guys who have been able to say whatever they want on this platform. Unfortunately for Ryan Garcia, it finally caught up to him. Like you said, boxers, they're not, the same as normal human beings. You do got some great guys out there, like you mentioned. But at the end of the day, these guys are fighters. And some of them have had, bad upbringings and, severe trauma. And a lot of these guys, aren't, the same as, normal people. Normal people don't go out there and fight for a living. Some of these people, some boxers, grew up in tough areas and had a box to live. But Ryan Garcia, I think he definitely needs to take a step back between everything that's happened with the PEDs, the racial slurs, the coming in overweight. He's probably, on drugs. He's definitely got a drug problem. I think if he steps back, takes a year off, goes to rehab, really figures out what, is causing him to tick like this. He's definitely got some severe mental health issues. Mental health is definitely, something that alpha males don't like to speak about. But I think it's time for Ryan Garcia to fully admit that he has a problem and really, really seek help. He's got all the talent in the world, and I really, really hate to see, the path that he's taken. I don't condone anything he's done, and I believe, maybe he should have even got a multi-year suspension. But he's definitely going to have to figure something out. I'm not sure, depending on some of the fans that he lost, if we'll ever be able to regain those fans ever again. But if he could put his body and mind, in at least a decent mindset to at least maybe get back in the ring a year or two, I think that's his only option at this point.
Yeah, and honestly, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about the WBC potentially suspending him even longer for the steroid situation and him popping hot. He went and tweeted again on Twitter, said, "I love steroids," after, popping hot. And then they had to go and investigate the B sample to see if he, for sure did take steroids. And it came back, positive again. But, when he was taunting them, I thought that they were going to hand a multi-year suspension down at that point. But this ban just kind of solidifies it that he will not be doing business with them going forward for the foreseeable future. Now I've talked to some other people. They thought that maybe he'd get a fight in the Middle East, that, maybe they'd look over some of the situations that he's got in the United States and give him a hefty paycheck. Do you think that's something that Ryan Garcia should look at, is maybe fighting someone over in Saudi Arabia?
Honestly, I don't. I think the best thing for him is just to get away from everything. When people have, mental health issues, and they got drug problems, it comes down to people, places, and things. And, if you're going to be around the same people and in the same places and doing the same things, you're going to, fall down the same trap as before. So I would like to just see him get away, completely get rid of whatever circle of friends or circle of people that he's around with right now, and completely just focus on himself. Get off of social media and just go to rehab and really, really focus on yourself and figure out, who he truly is and what truly does he want to do in this world. I really think he's a lost person at this point, and I think there's a lot of searching that he needs to do. And I think the worst thing he could do is just immediately jump in the boxing ring, and I think it would just continue to trend, and that would only prove and maybe build up his ego even more. They basically show like, hey, no matter what you do, I'm going to box and I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And that may make Ryan Garcia maybe even worse than what he is right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he needs to take time to reflect on kind of his actions and where he's at. If he does have a substance abuse problem, he does need to go to rehab. But we saw him kind of get escorted out of the arena after his brother was fighting on the undercard of one of these boxing events we're going to talk about here later in a minute. But his brother lost on that card, and then Ryan was escorted from the arena. He was not in rehab like some people thought he was going to be. So, I hope he does get there at some point and can lead a straight and narrow path going forward, because he is one of the best boxers in the world, and he is a world title contender. He could fight Tank Davis again. That Haney rematch is there if he got his head together. And it kind of gives me hope when you look at Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury was a guy who took 2 to 3, 4 years away from the sport. He had a substance abuse problem and came back better than ever and won a world title. I'm not saying that Ryan Garcia, is the greatest boxer in the world or something like Tyson Fury, but at the same time, he is a world title challenger and someone that is a massive draw, and probably will, even though he does this stuff, he's going to continue to be a massive draw.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad that you brought up Tyson Fury. It does show that there is a path to redemption for him. I guess the only thing is that, at least, Tyson Fury's not known for, saying any racial slurs or anything like that. I think that's the one thing that Ryan Garcia is going to have the toughest thing to come back from. Because, at the end of the day, a lot of the, percentage of the population and boxing fans are never going to let that go. But, Ryan Garcia could only control what he control. I don't condone it. But at the end of the day, I want the best for everybody. And, he's definitely, someone that's hurting right now. He's definitely someone that needs help. And, I want to see him get the help.
Yeah, I agree.
But now we finally get to, break down or preview, some fights. We got our main event. We got legend Rose Namajunas fighting against a rising contender in Tracy Cortez. Rose is, one of the all-time greats. I thought she looked really good against Rivas. I picked her to win that fight. Cortez 11-1 on a tremendous winning streak right now and looks to be a true contender in the women's flyweight division. But at the end of the day, I got to go with the legend like I did last time. I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas. I think she's going to be too much. And I think she's going to pull this win off by decision in a very, very close decision, maybe even split. But how do you see this one going, Brett?
I'm glad you brought that up because, Rose Namajunas is favored in this one, minus 225. And for her to win by points is minus 115. So that is not a number that I'm going to lay from a betting perspective. Now, do I think Rose Namajunas probably gets the victory here? Yeah, I do. But Tracy Cortez, to me, is too athletic on a great win streak. I think that this fight is going to be closer than the odds makers are giving it credit for currently. This is creeping towards Tracy Cortez being a 2-1 underdog. I think that Cortez is live here. I don't think that she might, go out and stop Rose Namajunas. But like you said, I think this is going to be a very competitive and close fight that probably goes to the distance. And if I'm looking to bet on it this weekend, I'm probably not putting money on Rose Namajunas at minus 225, though.
Yeah, 100%. I wouldn't touch this as a bettor on either side. Fight's way too close, and like you said, the odds are just not really good on either side. But it's definitely going to be an exciting fight. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the most exciting fight. It's the main event for a reason. But, wow, Brett, if Tracy, Cortez on short notice goes in there and beats Rose Namajunas, what a statement that's going to be for the women's flyweight division. It's definitely going to put her name right up there in the upper echelon of that division.
Absolutely, you're correct. And one of the things for Rose is, since moving up to flyweight, she really hasn't looked like she had at strawweight. Now, you were saying that the Amanda Hebos victory, was impressive, and it was. That was her best performance yet, but she was kind of picked apart a little bit by Manon Farrow and has struggled since moving up in weight. She's a smaller girl at 125 pounds. I think that Tracy Cortez is very physically strong. When you look at her statistics, she's averaging over 2.5 takedowns landed per fight. I think that's probably her path to victory. If you go back to Rose's losses to, Carla Esparza or Zhang Wei Li, she was out-wrestled and out-grappled in those matchups by stronger women. I think that that's the path to victory for Cortez in this one, is to take Rose off her feet and put her on the ground. Now, Rose does have veteran experience here. I do not believe that Cortez has ever been scheduled for 25 minutes. Rose has been scheduled for 25 minutes in championship rounds on multiple occasions, almost routinely. So, that's something obviously to look out for as well, and is probably why the odds makers are swaying in her favor, so heavily. But I really like Cortez in this one. I think she's going to make it competitive, and it's going to be close. I think taking Rose off her feet and putting her on her back is probably the best path to victory for Tracy this weekend, though.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I'm still going to go with Rose Namajunas. But yeah, Tracy Cortez, if she goes in there, she probably will be the bigger, person in the fight. The only thing is, like you stated before, fighting in a 5-round fight is pretty much the ultimate test for a fighter. We've seen it in the history. Sometimes there's fighters that can't fight the same in a 5-round fight, as doing a 3-round. A lot of guys like to go in there and just lay all their cardio out and gas out in the first 3 rounds, particular bigger fighters. And with Tracy Cortez being the bigger fighter, it's going to be interesting to see how her cardio, holds up when it does get into those later, championship, not saying it's championship fight, but championship type rounds in those 4th and 5th rounds. So I'm going to be interested to see. I think that's the thing I'm going to be most interested in. When we do get in those 4th and 5th rounds, I really want to see how Tracy performs. If she's still performing the same way, she's still got that same gas tank. I do think Rose Namajunas may be in some trouble here.
Yeah, I do too. Just to, go a little bit different from you, I'll take Tracy Cortez in this one by decision. I think this one probably goes all 5 rounds. Striker versus grappler, in my opinion. Now, Cortez is not only a grappler. She does have good hands as well. As I mentioned, she is athletic. But Rose is 32 years old. Cortez is 30. So it's not really that big of an age discrepancy as somebody would think based on the experience that Rose has. So it's going to be an interesting fight, and I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be one of the better, women UFC fights that we've seen in quite some time.
Yeah.
And that brings up to our next fight, which I think should have been the co-main event, potentially fight of the night. We got Drew Dober. Sorry for the typo in there, but it's Drew Dober going up against Gene Silva. Gene Silva, who we were just talking about last week, had the KO win against Charles Jourdain. Looked great. But for him to make a crazy 2-week turnaround is nothing short of amazing. something that's unheard of, for him to make such a quick turnaround. I think that is a tough ask going up against a veteran like Drew Dober, who was formerly ranked in the lightweight division. Both these guys can strike, but I think that's just too much to ask, too quick of a turnaround. I think Drew Dober is going to go out there, and I think Drew Dober is going to get the win. But how do you see this one going, Brett?
I really like this matchup. So Gene Silva misses the featherweight weight limit against Charles Jourdain. Now he's going to come back on 2-week notice. The UFC is going to move him up a weight class. He's going to fight at 155 pounds now for this one. Not against a guy who's a big 155 pounder. They're kind of easing him in here, giving him Drew Dober, somebody who's in the middle of the pack, right outside the top 15. Gene Silva's never been finished in his entire career, never been finished. Now, Drew Dober has been knocked out 4 times, but he is a tricky southpaw with one-punch power. We've seen him stop guys in the past like Terrence McKinney, who were coming up with a lot of promise. McKinney's been caught since then, but Dober was the first guy to really get McKinney clean, and he really derailed that hype train. This is not a new spot for Drew Dober, but Gene Silva, at least at 145, looked like a serious contender. I'm interested to see what he looks like at 155. I don't think that's necessarily should be his home, moving forward. We'll see this weekend. But there are a lot of big guys at 155 pounds. You look at the champion, Islam Makhachev. He's 5'11" compared to Gene Silva, who's 5'7". So, he's fighting someone in a very similar stature this weekend. And Drew Dober, 5'8" to 5'7". As I mentioned, the reach is almost identical at 70 and 69 inches apiece. I think this one's going to stay on the feet. I think that Gene Silva is going to get inside on Drew Dober like he did successfully against Charles Jourdain. And I think we're going to get a real firefight here. Can he handle the southpaw experience of Drew Dober? We're going to find out. But Gene Silva, at least at 145, looked like a legit contender.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an exciting matchup. It's definitely going to be a brawl. If you're an MMA fan that loves striking and loves, great boxing in MMA, this is definitely going to be the matchup for you. I just think Drew Dober at this time is just going to be too much. Particularly, like you said, the size won't matter. I think, I guess if you had to pick a lightweight for, Gene Silva, Drew Dober, height, weight-wise matches up well with Gene Silva. But I just think Drew Dober is going to outstrike him, and I think he's going to get the win by decision. But, if Gene Silva goes out there and has back-to-back wins, and say even if he goes out there and gets the KO win against Drew Dober, wow, what that's going to do for his hype, and his trajectory. It'd be interesting to see where he goes from there, because Drew Dober is a guy who a lot of people would say is just outside the top 15 of the lightweight. So if Gene Silva wins that fight, he pretty much should have his option of either a ranked featherweight or a ranked lightweight. So it's going to be great to see what his trajectory is. So if he goes out there, I think he's got the most to gain, but I'm going to side with Drew Dober right now by decision.
Yeah, I like what you said a lot there. There's a lot to gain for Gene Silva in this one. But when you look at it for Dober, I don't know what there really is to gain for him in this one. Maybe a top 15 ranking is what he's banking on with a victory here this weekend. But Drew Dober has been there, done that, a wealth of experience, 15 professional fights for Gene Silva, 40 professional fights for Drew Dober. I'm going to take the experience of Drew Dober just like you are, and I'm going to take him by points. I think Gene Silva is too tough to get out of there. I think both these guys have potential to hurt each other and maybe knock each other down. This is going to be an all-out slugfest, but I'll take Drew Dober in a war.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think this is going to be the fight of the night at my prediction. It could go either way, and I'm very, very excited for this fight.
Yeah, I am too.
So that brings us to our next fight, which is actually the co-main event. We got Santiago Ponzinibbio going up against Muslim Salikov. 2 older fighters, 2 OGs, veterans of the game. 2 guys who could definitely strike, just like we said in the last matchup. So this should be exciting. Just unfortunately, both guys are, over the hill, probably past their prime. But I think right now, Santiago was the better fighter in his prime, and I think he's still the better fighter now. I think Salikov is a little slow. I think he's slowed down a little bit over the years. We've seen both these guys, finished in their last couple fights. But I think right now, I'm going to lean towards Santiago in this one. But how do you see this one going, Brett?
Yeah, I like what you said there. The peak of Santiago Ponzinibbio's career was higher than Muslim Salikov. When he knocked out Neil Magny and face planted him, everybody thought this was the next dangerous striker in this division. But a staph infection, sidelined him for almost 3 years. And Ponzinibbio's talked about that a little bit, coming back and in the 4 fights he's had since then. He almost lost his life with that staph infection. He was in a hospital for numerous months on end. And didn't know if he was ever going to walk or fight again. So, when he came back here, he had a good fight against Miguel Baeza, but he got stopped against Kevin Holland and again took another year-long layoff here. He's been out for a year. I think that this may be too many layoffs in a row for Ponzinibbio. He is very athletic when he's right, when his legs are underneath him. But we've seen him caught clean by Li Jingliang. He was knocked out cold in that one. So he can be got as well. Muslim Salikov is a Sandu world champion. He's very technical. He does creative and dynamic striking. He has spinning techniques. He's somebody who should not be underestimated. I think that this, like you're saying, is two kind of older veterans going in there. I think the loser of this fight, might not have much left in the tank for their UFC career. So these guys could be fighting for their jobs this weekend.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I was going to bring that up as well. I think, the loser of this is probably going to be, leaving the UFC and probably going into retirement, particularly given their age and where they're at.
Yeah.
And one of these guys coming off of losses, I'm not sure where they go from there. Both guys are older fighters and coming off a loss against one of them, I think that pretty much seals the deal. It's unfortunate that it has to be this way and, we're potentially seeing one of these guys for the last time. But, it's unfortunate for Ponzinibbio and, his just bad luck because he really had a lot of potential to do a lot of great things and accomplish a lot of things if he would have been healthy. Yeah,
I agree. There was a lot of, very entertaining matchups there and a path to the title back when he did knock out Neil Magny. But, as I look at this now, Salikov has faced Randy Brown and Nicholas Dalby in his last 2 contests. 2 fighters that, since those losses have came and really rebounded and gone on runs. Dalby beat Bonf. Now, he was not victorious over Fakhretdinov, but he put up a valiant effort in that fight. Some people thought that he won. Dalby's a legit fighter, and he's going to be around the top 15 rankings probably for the foreseeable future. And Randy Brown is already ranked, and he's a very highly potential fighter and very talented. Muslim Salikov has been facing the better competition at least over the last calendar year to 2 years, considering Ponzinibbio was knocked out by Holland and then, has been sidelined. Is that something that you think is going to be a major factor in this one?
It definitely could be. Like you said, Nicholas Dalby is a great fighter. He's as close to a ranked level fighter as you can be without actually being ranked. So that can play a factor into this one, playing against going up against different competition. Given the fact that, it might be an easier matchup for him. He actually is downgrading in his opponents.
Yeah,
so
that's
this might be an
insane.
easier matchup, maybe less pressure. So that can definitely factor in, and maybe that does favor Salikov a little bit more.
Yeah. So the official betting lines for this one, fight fans, if you want Ponzinibbio, you'll have to lay 2-1. He's minus 200 as the favorite this weekend. Muslim Salikov plus 170. Those are kind of some enticing odds for me when looking at this one. Do you think it's worth money maybe putting it on Salikov?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I think the fight's close enough to where fight fans, if they want to make some money, definitely go with Salikov. Like I said, this fight could go either way. Both guys are definitely over the hill. So I think that would be a good bet for fight fans out there.
Yeah, and honestly, I see this fight ending by knockout. These are 2 guys that I don't know. They're going to go in there and they're going to trade and they're going to leave everything in there. But I don't know if they're going to be, still durable enough to make it 3 rounds after one of these extended wars. I'm going to take Salikov in this one by knockout. I got the underdog big.
So I guess, we're definitely going to have some disagreements here because I'm going Santiago Ponzinibbio by knockout as well. I think he's going to get the knockout. I think he's going to have the faster hands. I think he's going to display a better, boxing. I think he's going to outstrike him. And I think he's going to catch him. And I think he's going to knock him out in probably the second round.
Yeah, I certainly think someone's going to sleep in this matchup.
Now it brings us to my lock of the week. I know the odds are pretty high in his favor, but my lock of the week, my guaranteed win this week, We got Gabriel Bonf going up against Angie Lusa. I think Gabriel Bonf is tremendous. He's 15-1. He's got tremendous ground game. I love his ground attack. I think Lusa didn't look too good against Brian Battle. He was losing that fight, and then I think he kind of went down and had a no contest. I think he could have continued if he really wanted to, but he knew Brian Battle was going to win the fight, and to save the loss, he did a no contest. So I know a lot of fans may not agree with that, but I really think Lusa could have continued in that fight. I lost a lot of respect for him, and honestly, at the end of the day, I think Bonf is the better fighter. I think he's going to use that ground attack in his favor, and I think he's going to win this fight by decision. But how do you see this one going?
Yeah, Ange Lusa is a very physically gifted athlete. He's strong. 5 wins by knockout on his record out of 10 professional victories. But Gabriel Bonf, like you said, is a great grappler. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. If this fight hits the ground, I think Bonfim's going to get a submission victory in this one relatively easily in the first or second round. But Ange Lusa is dangerous on the feet. If he catches Bonfim cleanly, he can knock him out. But I think that if Bonfim, finds any trouble on the feet with Ange Lusa, he'll be able to find a home for that takedown and utilize that ground game. So I've got Gabriel Bonfim in this one by submission. I like his potential, and I like his ground game. Just too much to handle for Ange Lusa in this matchup, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. That's why that's my lock of the week. I now, thinking about it, I probably, I'm going to switch it. I'm going to go by submission. I'm that confident in Bonfim. His ground game is just going to be way too much. And like I said, like you said, I agree. He's definitely going to go out there. I think he's going to get the submission win as well.
Yeah.
So that brings us to our next fight, another good fight on the main card. Rising contender Christian Rodriguez. We've been very high on him as well. Every time he fights, we brag about him each time. He's going up against Julian Moraes, who's a veteran of the UFC, won his last fight, has fought against ranked opponents and, fought against some really, really good fighters. Has 11 submission wins and 13 KO wins. I love his ground game as well. I just don't think he's going to get the win in this one. As I stated before, we love Christian Rodriguez. He's a rising star. I think he's got, top 15 ranked potential all over him. He's been on a great winning streak. He's won 4 straight. Even though I do think his win over Bulgarian may have been controversial and could have went either way. I just think Christian Rodriguez is going to be too much for Rosa. So I'm going to go with Christian Rodriguez by decision, and I think he's going to get a ranked fighter very, very soon. But what do you think about this one, Brett?
Yeah, Christian Rodriguez's last 3 wins, Raul Rosas Jr., Cameron Simon, and Bulgarian, those are great victories outside the top 15. And I certainly think, as you mentioned, that he's going to be a ranked fighter here very shortly. Now, the interesting stylistic part in this matchup is the height of Erosa against Christian Rodriguez. We haven't seen Rodriguez face someone that is this much taller than him. Erosa is 6'1" in the featherweight division. Now, Christian Rodriguez is 5'7". He's also going to be giving up 3 inches in reach in this one. I think that's kind of why the odds are as close as they are. Some people would look at this and say, well, Erosa's a 12 losses in his career. He's 34 years old. Why is he less than a 2-1 underdog against Rodriguez, who's on the up and coming and is 26? But I think a lot of that has to do with the height and reach advantage in this one for Erosa. It's going to be an interesting thing that we're going to have to see Christian Rodriguez overcome for the first time in his career. But I think he'll be able to do that relatively easily. Erosa isn't a guy that is going to get you out of there on the feet. He's very tricky on the ground, very long. He can put those triangle chokes on you. He also has the long arm chokes like the Darces and the front headlocks that he can get wins with as well. But I'm going to take Christian Rodriguez in this one. I think he's too young, too good, and too athletic. 26 years old, and he's on the up and up. He's going to be a ranked fighter relatively quickly, and this is probably my lock of the week.
And I got him winning by decision. How do you see Rodriguez getting the win?
Yeah, I got him winning by decision as well. If he finishes Erosa on the feet, I wouldn't be surprised. Erosa, as I mentioned, is a tricky grappler, so if Rodriguez were to submit him, that might be a little bit of surprise. But I think Erosa will be tough enough to survive, and Christian Rodriguez will outsmart his way to a decision victory in this one.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the size difference. It's definitely going to be a unique, stylistic matchup for Rodriguez. Something that he hasn't, faced before. I do think, Delgarian is still probably the best fighter that he's fought so far up to this point. But Erosa is going to give him a bunch of different, problems as well. And if he goes out there and shows that length and height difference doesn't matter, it's definitely going to be scary for the rest of the division because I really don't see how else, you can have an advantage of him if that doesn't affect him as well.
Yep. I think that for Rodriguez, we saw the matchup against Raul Rosas Jr. He is a dominant jiu-jitsu player, but he's not a dominant wrestler. I think Rodriguez, the real stylistic matchup that may give him problems is going against a Dagestani wrestler or a combat sambo type guy that has those relentless takedowns. Now, at featherweight, you got to beware of Mosvar Evloev. Obviously, he's on the up and up. I think that's kind of the guy that is the worst stylistic matchup for Rodriguez, but he's been a matchup nightmare in his own right for people, especially guys who can't get him to the ground like Raul Rosas. These jiu-jitsu players have really struggled with him not being able to get him to the ground.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, that's the only way a fighter will probably beat Christian Rodriguez. You're going to have to beat him at his own game, and you're going to have to, out-grapple him. And, probably the only guys out there that can out-grapple him are these crazy Dagestani wrestlers who are the best in the world at what they do. So I probably will take one of that, but it's going to be interesting to see. Rodriguez goes out there, gets another win, extends his winning streak. He's definitely going to be knocking on the door and definitely going to be wanting a household name and a ranked fighter pretty soon, if not in his next fight.
Yep, and I think he probably deserves one.
Yeah, I agree. We got some other good fights. I think this is a pretty deep card. It may not be the best card, but I think for a fight night, there's plenty of great fights and plenty of depth to this card. One fight that sticks out to me in particular, I think it's one of the best fights. It's a fight among two flyweights who I think both find themselves just outside the top 15 of the flyweight division. And I think that's Josh Van going up against Charles Johnson. I believe Van, is one of the 15 best flyweights in the world right now. He was supposed to get a ranked fighter, but it didn't fall through. So they're matching him up against Charles Johnson, who in his own right's a good fighter. Both fighters are great, and both fighters could definitely win this. Josh Van, being just 22 years of age, and Charles Johnson being in his prime, it's going to be a great fight. But I'm going to go with Josh Van in this one. I think he's going to get a close win. And he's definitely going to be challenging for a top 15 position next in the flyweight division. But what are some other fights and thoughts that you have, Brett?
I really liked the Joshua Van and Charles Johnson fight. I was at Charles Johnson's last fight versus Jake Hadley in St. Louis. He was an underdog in that one and got the job done. I believe he'll be entering as an underdog again this weekend against Joshua Van. Actually, the line has not even been officially released for that matchup yet. As I'm looking at it on ESPN Bet, it has not officially been released. But Joshua Van, I believe, has some of the best potential in all of the flyweight division. We were talking about Steve Erceg coming up. We were really early on that train before he rose to victory over Matt Schnell and these guys. I think that Joshua Van is the next guy up at the flyweight division. He's going to be making a push here for the title sooner rather than later. He's 22 years old. Obviously, you're going to have to, pump the brakes maybe a little bit, but this weekend is going to tell us a lot. 33-year-old Charles Johnson, he's a grimy wrestler, a very tough competitor, is not someone you get out of there easily. And Joshua Van, has a lot of potential. I can't wait for that matchup. I think we're going to learn a lot about Van and see what his potential really is and how good he could be.
And I think this speaks to something that we've been talking about a lot. I really think we're starting to see maybe the golden age of the flyweight division in UFC. It seems like each and every month we have a new guy in that division that we're talking about. We have Islam Makhachev, then we had Steve Erceg, then we've seen Tatsuya Taira get a great win, and now we got Joshua Van. I think, for a while the flyweight division among probably maybe with the heavyweight and light heavyweight division were the three weaker divisions in the UFC. There's a clear drop-off between the other divisions and those ones. But I think, the evolution, of the flyweight division has definitely put the flyweight division on notice, and has definitely showed UFC fight fans that the flyweight division, maybe taking a step forward and maybe pushing themselves up to be maybe in the same conversations as the other weight classes in the top of the division UFC.
Yeah, and that's even before we mention guys like Amir Albazi and Manel Cape, who are probably one fight away from a title opportunity themselves. So, flyweight is wide open right now. You got a lot of guys with different skill sets that, have massive potential. And As you said, I think that this is the best the flyweight division has ever looked in terms of depth.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very, very excited for the flyweight division. And like I said, it's got a bad rap. Anytime I ever talk to my boys about a flyweight fight, they're always disinterested.
Yeah.
But I think that trend's starting to change, and I think we're going to start seeing more fight fans interested in some of these highly contested flyweight fights.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to talk about later in the show. Kai Kara-France and Steve Erceg looks to be something that's rumored as well. So we're going to talk about that matchup. That's a great fight as well.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that actually did happen last week, it wasn't no fight, fights happened. We did get Nate Diaz fighting Jorge Masvidal in one of these, lackluster boxing matches of UFC fighters who are over the hill, who are MMA guys, not boxing guys. But people still want to see him. And, I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't watch it too much, but I was happy that Nate Diaz went out there and got the win. I love Nate Diaz's personality. I think he's a great guy. I love his, his hard toughness. And I really don't like Jorge Masvidal. I think he's kind of a punk. So I'm glad that Nate Diaz got the win. But what were your thoughts about this, Brett?
Yeah, I watched the whole fight, and they were busier than any other celebrity boxing match or they are celebrities, but they're fighters. I'm not going to call them influencers. But they were busier than most of these fights. You see Tommy Fury and Jake Paul in the Tyron Woodley fights, Jake Paul and Nate Diaz. Anybody you want to sit there and watch, Mike Tyson, Roy Jones, these guys were the most in shape and most active of any of those guys. 700 punches landed or thrown for Nate Diaz, 650 thrown for Jorge Masvidal. I thought that Masvidal landed the more impactful punches. I thought that his punches did more damage. This one took place in Nate Diaz's backyard in Los Angeles, California. He grew up in Stockton, a short drive. So I don't know if that had anything to do with the judge's decision in this one. I had the fight scored for Masvidal personally. The boxing judging was all over the place this weekend. We had this one. We had O'Shaquie Foster losing to Conceição, losing his junior lightweight world title on the co-main event of the Shakur Stevenson fight. That was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. Mark Cagle had it 11-1 for O'Shaquie Foster, and that one may have been, generous. And the other two judges go around and score the fight for Conceição. I'm sorry, Mark Cagle was the broadcast scorecard keeper, and two of the judges gave it to Conceição, one to Foster. That was a bad decision, and I thought this decision in the Nate Diaz fight was not equally as bad, but it was still not great. Nate Diaz was putting pressure on him. He was having more volume. He looked better as the fight lasted, but Jorge Masvidal was fighting out of the southpaw stance and really landing check left or check right hooks and right hands to the body whenever he wanted. He was snapping Nate's head back. I thought that the shots of Masvidal weren't given much credit in that fight. Now, as a person, I don't know Jorge Masvidal, but I don't know where he really goes from this fight after taking a loss. If he beat Nate Diaz, maybe Jake Paul's on the horizon because they hadn't fought before. Maybe, Chael Sonnen had been, shooting his mouth off at him a little bit. Maybe something would have happened there. But I don't know where Jorge goes from here. You can't go back into mixed martial arts. You're not in the UFC anymore. And in boxing, you just lost to a guy who lost to a YouTuber. So you're in a tough spot if you're Jorge Masvidal. That's kind of my thoughts on how the fight went out this week.
Yeah, and for Jorge Masvidal, he has stated that he has some fights left in the UFC. I'm not sure who he'd even fight in the UFC. He's definitely not warranted of any ranked opponent. I'm not even sure what weight class he'd be in. I'm not sure if he'd even make welterweight anymore. Maybe he could fight some big name guy at 185.
You know who I think he should fight? I'm just thinking of this as you were talking. If Mike Perry loses to Jake Paul, I think Jorge Masvidal versus Mike Perry for the BKFC belt is the best thing that I'd want to see him in right now. Because Jorge came up on the streets with Kimbo Slice, bare knuckle, back in the day. I think there'd be a little bit of a storyline going into that one. Mike Perry and Masvidal both were welterweights in the UFC, same size. I think that's probably the best option for him if Mike Perry, falls in a competitive fight to Jake Paul.
Yeah, I 100% love that. And Mike Perry is going to need some big names in the, the bare knuckle boxing realm. And Jorge Masvidal would be a perfect big name for him. Now, what you would say in the fight was so controversial, do you think there's any possibility of a rematch between Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal?
You know, I don't know how much. Well, there were 18,000 people in attendance, so people did want to see this fight. It was a sellout in a massive arena. So, you know, there was fanfare and interest. Maybe that's because there wasn't much going on. As we talked about, Shakur was fighting, but there was no UFC card. There was no Bellator. There was no PFL. So this really was the only thing that fight fans had to look at after this weekend was that in the top-ranked boxing card. So I don't know how well this would play if they ran it back for a third time, but, you know, they are one apiece. Certainly they could make some money if they did it again. But would you be interested in watching it, Anthony?
Not really, because I wasn't interested the first time. And, you know, for on a weekend, like you said, where there really wasn't much, you know, combat sports going on in the world, it didn't get as many views as it probably should have been. You know, so I love Jorge Masvidal fighting Mike Perry. For Nate Diaz, I would honestly love to see him fight Jake Paul in MMA for the first time. Jake Paul keeps stating that he wants to fight in MMA, and I think Nate Diaz would be a perfect first fight for him in MMA, whether that's in the PFL or somewhere else. But I know Jake Paul, I think he may have signed with the PFL, so I'm pretty sure if he does fight MMA, it would have to be with them. But I wouldn't mind seeing him, you know, fight Nate Diaz. But like you said, you know, with the Foster fight, you know, I was watching top-ranked boxing, so that's what I was more focused on. And, you know, I don't think I've ever seen a more atrocious, you know, scorecard than that. You know, I thought Foster destroyed his opponent. I thought he pretty much won every single round, maybe outside of one or two. But for the judges to score that, a split decision the other way, you know, was absolutely a travesty. I think that's one of the worst scorecards. And it just speaks to the state of boxing. You know, boxing's, you know, kind of dying out. And these judges and promoters are constantly, you know, playing a part of the downfall of it. But, you know, I did get to watch Shakur Stevenson retain his belt. Shakur Stevenson had another dominant win, you know, retaining his belt over Artem. You know, he's an awesome fighter. You know, unfortunately, he's not as remarkable as a Ryan Garcia or the Tank Davis. But skill-wise, he's up there with just the best of them. Devin Haney, you know, Tank Davis, Lomachenko. I think he's up there with anybody, but he's kind of the boogeyman of boxing right now. None of these guys want to fight him. He's not as marketable, but skill-wise, he's just as good as them. So I think they're just scared to fight him because they know skill for skill, he could go out there and beat him. And I think right now everybody's ducking Shakur Stevenson.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. The juice really isn't worth the squeeze with Shakur Stevenson. You know, he's too talented to sit there and risk maybe not the highest paycheck in the world against him, you know. Maybe he's not a household name yet, but his defensive boxing skills are absolutely elite. You see this guy fight at Artem's range. Artem wanted this fight in the pocket the whole time, and he got it in the pocket the whole time, and Shakur was barely hit. It was just astonishing to me how Shakur was able to stand so close to Artem and still not get hit. It wasn't like you see Floyd Mayweather or one of these guys who's at distance trying to keep you off with a jab and then moving away against the ropes. He was in his grill, and he was still, you know, Philly shell and shouldering away and not getting hit with these punches at all. And then coming back with volume and landing 2 or 3 or 4 punches of his own. Now, did he get Artem out of there or knock him down? No. And, you know, as an offensive fighter, Shakur has taken a lot of criticism for his output in fights and not being able to get these guys away that, you know, the viewing public thinks he should be able to get out of there like Artem. But, you know, defensively, you can't go out there and try and be something you're not and make a mistake. And I think Shakur knows that in these matchups. You can't go in there and try and be the bully when you're not the bully. You got to do what you're good at. And honestly, if you look at it, I think he matches up better against Tank Davis than anyone else in the division's close. The defensive ability to not get hit, I think, is a huge factor that you're going to have to need against Tank Davis, someone who's seek and destroy and trying to send missiles at you with his left hand. I'd really love to see that contest between an elite offensive fighter in Davis versus an elite defensive fighter in Stevenson.
Yeah, I think that's the fight to make. Shakur Stevenson and Tank Davis. You know, stylistically, that would be perfect. Given his defensive background, and Tank Davis, so for everybody he fights, you know, he finds that chin. So it'd be interesting to see if he's able to do that, the Shakur Stevenson. I know Lomachenko's out there, and Lomachenko is the guy who does take risks. And maybe Lomachenko's the only guy of those top echelon guys that fight Shakur Stevenson. But maybe it works out in both ways, because maybe that's the win Shakur Stevenson needs to maybe get a guy like Tank Davis to fight. But if those two guys fight, I think right now that could be one of the biggest, if not the biggest, fight to make in the boxing world.
Yeah, I agree, especially as you see, we're talking about Ryan Garcia being out for an extended period of time. Tank Davis is going to need new, fresh opponents. But like you were saying, is he going to want to do it against a guy in Shakur Stevenson who might be his hardest stylistic matchup? We'll have to see.
Yeah, and, with boxing, we sometimes take forever to get these fights. And, hopefully, Tank Davis and, Shakur Stevenson is not another Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather where they don't fight for 10 years, and then when they do it, they're out of their prime.
Or Canelo Benavidez currently.
Yeah. But, the UFC did make some announcements, and there was some news. The UFC officially announced Steve Erceg going up against Kai Kara-France at UFC 305. It hasn't been announced as the co-main event, but it can potentially be the co-main event. It's definitely going to be the second or third fight on the card with huge title implications. I think, Steve Erceg looked great against Pantoja. I think his fight was much closer than Roy Bell's fight. I think if Steve Erceg goes out there, it enables him to rebound and officially solidify himself as a top 5 contender in the division. What were your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, and Steve Erceg, we've been talking about him for a while. Power on the hands, but he's well-rounded. His jiu-jitsu game is great, and he would have won that fight if not for the mistake in that 5th round and getting reversed on the ground. Steve Erceg fought brilliantly against Pantoja, in my opinion, until that mistake in the 5th round. But it only takes one mistake, and that fight was so close that, it affected all 3 judges' scorecards. Everybody had that fight 2-2 going into the 5th. But I'm happy that Erceg gets back here against a guy in Kai Kara-France who's a household name for flyweights. He went and stopped Cody Garbrandt. He's been there against superstar guys. But I don't think this is going to be a fight where Steve Erceg tries to hang out on the feet and kickbox the kickboxer with Kai Kara-France. I think that he's going to try and get his jiu-jitsu and wrestling game involved in this one and take this fight to the ground. This is a very interesting matchup for me. I still think Erceg has massive potential and will be a champion sometime in the future. We're going to have to see if that fight with Pantoja gave him a wealth of experience or damaged his confidence a little bit.
Yeah, it could go either way. It could definitely, taper his, confidence, or, it could give him more confidence knowing that he was that close in a 5-round fight to beating the champion. So it's going to be interesting to see. Right now, I probably would lean towards Steve Erceg. But we have a lot of time, and, I wouldn't be surprised if I do change my opinion, because Kai Kara-France is a great fighter. I thought it was a controversial fight when he fought Albazi. I thought that fight could have went either way as well. So Kai Kara-France is, just as good as anybody in the top 5, and I'm very, very excited for this matchup.
Yeah, I am too, and that's shaping up to be quite the card. A lot of Australian fighters on that one. It looks like Tai Tuivasa, Junior Tafa, Casey O'Neill, and also Josh Kulabau look to be on that main card.
Yeah, I know we'll talk more about UFC 305. The only thing that upsets me is I feel like if he was healthy, I really think the co-main event of UFC 305 could have been potentially Shavkat Rakhmonov going up against Jack Dellella in a #1 contenders match. But Jack Dellella is dealing with some injuries. And there was a snapshot of the card. There were some snapshots behind Dana White of UFC 305 and 304. And, it looked like JDM and Shavkat Rakhmonov's name was on that card. So I think the UFC potentially was looking at maybe having that as a fight. But with the injury, we'll see if that fight gets rescheduled or if they decide to go with different plans. But like you said, UFC 305 is going to be awesome. The main event, we're finally going to get Izzy and Dricus, and I can't wait to break that down.
Yeah, I can't wait for that card. Izzy and Dricus, man, that is going to be a bloodbath. Those guys have, they have bad blood. It's going to be a great fight. We're supposed to get it before Strickland upset Izzy. We're finally getting it this year. I can't wait.
And we had some other, rumors / announcements, not officially announced by the UFC, but there's some rumblings going around that, the UFC Fight Night in France later this year is going to feature potentially as the main event Renato Moicano going up against Benoit Saint Denis. I think this is a great matchup stylistically. Both guys are just outside the top 10. Both rising contenders right now. Benoit St. Denis looked like he was going to begin the next title shot against Islam before he fell short against Dustin Poirier. And we see Money Moicano go out there and look great. He's on a decent winning streak, being Jalen Turner. So I think this is going to be an interesting fight. And I think this fight's going to actually factor in pretty heavily to what the future of the lightweight division, entails.
Yeah, I do too. Now, in this one, we kind of have two, heavy submission guys going against one another, which historically means that this fight's going to take place on the feet. If that happens, I favor Benoit St. Denis, but this one's going to be fantastic. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in Moicano versus a European grappling champion in Benoit St. Denis. And obviously with that military background, he's one of the toughest customers in all of the UFC. So I can't wait for that fight.
Yeah, 100%. We also have some other rumblings. Jon Jones and both Bo Nickell both posted on social media that they are going to be fighting November 9th at UFC 305 at Madison Square Garden. Now, we always knew UFC 309 was going to be at Madison Square Garden in November. Hasn't been officially announced the date, but right now it looks like it may be November 9th, and it looks like we're going to get Jon Jones and Bo Nickell. Jon Jones most likely is going to be fighting Stipe. Joe Rogan said that multiple times that fight has to happen. So we already know where that's going to, go. But for Bo Nickell, I'm interested to see, what opponent he gets next. It's interesting to see how slow the UFC wants to take Bo Nickell. There's a lot of great matchup. I know you mentioned before Joe Pfeiffer, but Joe Pfeiffer is looking to fight Paul Craig, and he's really, really pushing UFC for that. So I'm not sure if it's Joe Pfeiffer. There's been rumblings of, Sharab Magomedov, but I'm not sure with his eye if he get cleared to fight at Madison Square Garden. But what do you think about this, Brett? And, what are some opponents that you think may be interesting for Bo Nickell?
I guess like you're saying, it really depends on what the UFC wants to do with him, how fast they want to push him. A name that, kind of sticks out to me is Michel Pereira, who moved up to 185 pounds and is one of the most creative and dynamic guys in the entire UFC. He's got, finishing ability on the feet, has sneaky submissions on the ground, is an absolute, dynamo athletically. He goes in there and attempts things people only dream of. He's a great fighter, and I don't know if they're going to give Bo Nickell to him or a guy like Joe Pfeiffer or Jack Hermanson or somebody of that level yet, but that day will eventually come, and Bo Nickell is going to have to fight, a high caliber level fighter at some point. The people who have came from his exact background, Olympic alternates like Daniel Cormier and Dan Henderson, people who are Hall of Famers of the sport. Those guys jumped into the deep end of the pool very, very early. Daniel Cormier entered that Strikeforce Grand Prix and had to fight Josh Barnett in like his 5th pro fight. And Josh Barnett, is the former heavyweight champion and knocked out Randy Couture. So, people have had to really step up on short notice in the past. And I don't think that I think Nickell has kind of been treated with kids' gloves to an extent with the matchmaking he's been given, kind of favorably that we've seen early in his career. I'd like to see a step up in competition. And if he does get that step up, I think it's got to be Joe Pfeiffer. Joe Pfeiffer has been calling out Paul Craig. Paul Craig needs to retire. That is not a fight that anybody is really clamoring for. But when you have Joe Pfeiffer, who might be the best American knockout artist at 185 pounds, versus Bo Nickell, who might be the best American wrestler in all of the UFC, that's a great stylistic matchup. You have bragging rights with your country on the line. You have contention for a title on the line. If those guys went in there and fought one another at 309, maybe they're moved in to the upper echelon of the division with a win and are in some title eliminator or some matchup with Apollo Costa or somebody like I'm not saying they get Robert Whittaker, but somebody up there in the top 6, top 7 of the division if they got matched up against one another. But if they both keep slow playing it, it's going to be a tougher road to the title for each.
Yeah, I think with the UFC, I think they're going to slow play Bo Nickell a little bit more. Then Joe Pfeiffer, we've seen Joe Pfeiffer just get tested against Jack Hermanson. And if he goes out and does beat Paul Craig, he's definitely going to get a ranked fighter after that. But like you said, Paul Craig is probably over the hill. And honestly, I think he was better suited at light heavyweight than he was at 185. His best wins came at light heavyweight, and he hasn't been the same at middleweight. But for Bo Nickell, honestly, kind of basically what we just saw with Joe Pfeiffer. After he lost to Jack Hermanson, they gave him a guy in Marc-Andre Bellevue who is a decent fighter, guy who's not ranked, but maybe just outside the rankings. I would like to see maybe Bo Nickell get a guy around that type of level. Maybe not him exactly, but maybe a guy just outside the top 15. And if he can get past that, then let him get a top 15 guy. And I think the UFC may be building up Bo Nickell to maybe be 2025, the year that he does make a statement in UFC and does get those ranked fighters and starts maybe getting a main event. But, if they do decide to match him up against Joe Pfeiffer, I think that would be a highly, highly marketable selling fight. That could be a co-main event or definitely a third fight on the card. Both guys are highly, highly, popular. We've seen Joe Pfeiffer, already have a main event on a UFC Apex card. I just don't know if the UFC wants to kill their top two American, prospects right now. But what a great fight if they do decide to go that way.
Yeah, I don't know if you'll ever see those guys matched up for a title. I think it'd be really hard for them to, try and manufacture that. And as you're saying, they'd have to pit their two stars against one another and one would go down. But if you look at these up-and-comers in this division, you look at the Pereiras, you look at Michel Pereira, not, Alex Pereira, but Michel Pereira, you look at Bo Nickell, you look at Khamzat Chimaev, all these guys, Joe Pfeiffer, they're going to have to fight one another at some point. When we saw the featherweights coming up back in the day when we had that good crop of featherweights with Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor, those guys fought each other, and they fought each other multiple times, and I just would like to see that from a fight fan's perspective. Maybe match them up young in their career, and then one gets better as they get older, and that's how rivalries are built. So I don't know. The UFC is the best storytellers in all of combat sports. They know what they're doing, and I'm sure they'll put in good matchups for us for 309.
And maybe that's at the end of the day what separates UFC from boxing. Boxing loves to have these guys just, keep, cherry picking their fights, build up their records to where they're 20-0, 25-0, and then they can promote the fight a lot better. The UFC, like you said, doesn't do that. They just match you up against the top guy each time. And that's why, we don't see guys with, undefeated records. And we see guys with multiple losses, like a Charles Oliveira, who could end up being one of the all-time greats with multiple losses, or a Max Holloway. Like you said, UFC's best at storytelling. So why not match them up now? And then if they do match up later on, that even makes it even more compelling and maybe a better story. And maybe that's why the UFC continues to outperform and continues to, do better than boxing.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see what we get, but I'm excited. Bo Nickell and Jon Jones on a pay-per-view. It's going to be great.
And, to wrap things up here, our last topic, there's a lot of discussion on, who Islam Makhachev's next opponent is. Obviously, everybody knows it's going to be Arman Tsarukyan, but now with the suspension looming over us, there's a lot of people saying a lot of things. You got Michael Chandler saying he was offered a fight. I find that hard to believe. I don't see that making sense at all. We got Charles Oliveira's coach talking about how he's going to fight, and maybe he wants to try to fight for the title at the end of the year. But, I just think that would be an absolute mess, and I don't agree with either of that. I do think Arman Tsarukyan is the fight to make, even if you have to wait the 9 months, the extra 30 months, you have to. That's the fight to make. That's the number one contender. That's, I think, the toughest matchup for Islam Makhachev. But if I do have to pick somebody else, I'd much rather see Justin Gaethje get a title shot over a Michael Chandler or a Charles Oliveira. We haven't seen Gaethje against Islam Makhachev, and I love to see Islam against new matchups and against new opponents. And if I'm going to throw another name out there, I think Matthias Gamrot is more deserving of a title shot than Michael Chandler and maybe even Charles Oliveira. I think Gamrot's, put together some good fights, and I would like to see him or Gaethje get it if it can't be Arman Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan did tweet out, that you guys are going to have to wait, that I have to get the next title shot. So it does seem like it may be Tsarukyan, but what are your thoughts on what's going on with this title shot and Islam's next opponent?
We sit here and if you look at the rankings in the top 10 of this division, Arman Tsarukyan's ranked first. But after that, none of these guys are deserving of title shots. Arman Tsarukyan is head over shoulders the most deserving challenger in this division. He has that fight with Islam Makhachev in his debut that, was as competitive as we've seen a fight with Makhachev outside of the Volkanovski first fight. Arman Tsarukyan has improved since then. We saw him finish Beneil Dariush with his hands. He just beat former champion Charles Oliveira, who you mentioned is trying to position himself for this title shot off of a loss. Let's look at the division here real quick. We've got a little bit of time. Charles Oliveira coming off of a loss. Justin Gaethje coming off of a loss. Dustin Poirier lost last month to Islam Makhachev. Mateusz Gamrot, as you mentioned, is number 5, but he has not really had that definitive victory to propel him in to a title opportunity, unfortunately. Me and you are very high on Gamrot. His wrestling ability and his scrambling is unbelievable, and I think that Islam Makhachev would have trouble taking him to the ground, and that would be a fight that would probably test Islam on the feet. I think that's a good stylistic matchup, but he's got to be able to earn that with some type of victory, in my opinion. Arman Tsarukyan is the deserving challenger. If you have to wait, just like you said, the 9 months, I agree. I think you have to wait the 9 months. You look at the 145-pound division right now. We've already had a guy in Volkanovski move up to try and challenge for that 155. So I don't see Topuria doing anything like that. He's got unfinished business with Max Holloway. Honestly, if they made the Max Holloway versus Islam Makhachev fight, I wouldn't hate it, but I want to see Max Holloway versus Ilia Topuria with both belts on the line for sure. That one to me is my most anticipated fight left here, and I think it's going to be made here in 2024. But I don't think that 145 is a play. I don't think that the rest of the division outside Tsarukyan's a play unless you went with Gamrot or Gaethje. So yeah, I agree. I think you got to wait the 9 months and let Arman get his turn.
Yeah, I think like you said it, or like we both said, the fight has to be made. It has to be Arman Tsarukyan. It's the only one that makes sense. But if it can't be Tsarukyan and it has to be a 155, it seems like you're siding with Mateusz Gamrot as the only other one that would make sense. It's unfortunate for him that he did lose to Beneil Dariush, but he has beaten Tsarukyan. And he has looked pretty good, in his career. I really like Mateusz Gamrot, but what's definitely, hurting him is he's not a household name. And I really don't think a Mateusz Gamrot and Islam Makhachev pay-per-view main event is going to sell all that many, slots. I think if the UFC has to pull one, I think that they will go with Justin Gaethje. I think Gaethje would sell the most tickets. They could sit there and say, hey, he lost to, a 145, or he didn't lose to a lightweight. He did beat, Dustin Poirier. So that's the only one that the UFC could probably sell and make marketable. But I think the UFC will do the right thing, and I think at the end of the day, it will be Arman Tsarukyan fighting Islam Makhachev at the end of 2024.
Would you rather see Topuria and Max Holloway for both belts, or Islam and Max Holloway for both belts?
Honestly, I think I would like to see Topuria versus Holloway for both belts. Nothing against Islam. I think Islam pound for pound probably is the best fighter on the planet right now. And I think he'd beat, any of those guys in the featherweight, lightweight, and probably anybody in welterweight I think Islam could beat. But I think the BMF title is usually for guys who are predominantly like to strike and guys who are more strikers. We don't usually see the wrestlers or the Dagestanis really be BMF type. That's no shame to them. It's just stylistically, it's always the guy who's very excited and likes to strike. Yeah. And I think that's, falls right in line with Topuria versus Max Holloway.
Yeah, I agree. It's more of a fan-friendly belt. It's a fight that fans can say, oh, there's a BMF title on the line. This is going to be, a war, a very high-action fight. So I agree. I think that the better fight is probably Topuria and Holloway.
And, that's all we have this week, fight fans. But we'll be, back next week. So definitely make sure to tune in. We'll be posting episode 4 next week, Tuesday, at 7 p.m., same time, Eastern Standard Time as always. Make sure to follow Puncher's Chance Podcast at all social media at Punch ETB. Make sure to follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. Make sure to also follow the YouTube channel at youtube.com/EPT Network for all of our shows and other ETB Network news. If you can't watch us, put your AirPods in and listen to us on the road whenever you can.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, fight fans. We'll tune back in next week, break down UFC Denver and any fight news that we get over the weekend. Thanks for coming.
See ya.
See you guys.